There is an old expression that life imitates art. When you get into the activity of creating something, you never consider how the thing that you're creating is going to change you as a person. If I go back to when my channel started, more than 3 years ago, the things I wanted from all this were simply to share my perspective and to find the people I could connect with. Now, did any of that happen? I really can't say. I don't feel like I gained any new friends as a result of making videos, and it's possible I even lost a few in the process. Though, that as it may, the process of creating became something rather therapeutic, and I was happy filming the kinds of stories that I personally would want to watch. When I couldn't find others making these kinds of videos, being able to make my own felt good to me. But then things started to change. I think it really began around the summer of 2024 when I was doing Need for Speed Rivals. I got so into the character of being a bad cop turned criminal that I started to rethink my own perspective of law enforcement. It certainly didn't help that 6 months later, the politics of the country changed drastically enough that a person like me was placed under additional unnecessary scrutiny. I am still very bitter about that, but I felt like I was able to channel that into something constructive when I recorded the video, "We Are All Criminals: Deconstruction of the Rule of Law." This idea that the law is so fragile, that being told to believe the opposite of what you've known to be true is all it takes to undermine everything which is good in this world, is a rather difficult pill to swallow. There is a certain degree of critical thinking which is required to tell yourself a person is neither good nor bad simply because society has labeled them to be such. Based on their actions, Zephyr and Fate were both neither good nor evil. They helped some people, and they hurt others. The labels of good or bad became relative to who was helped and who was hurt. That started to weigh on me, because in the real world, I had gone to great lengths in order to help others, which inevitably led to hurting some people along the way. My being good or bad becomes equally relative to the people I've helped versus the people I've hurt. There will always be people who hate me, people who judge me as being this horrible, reprehensible person. Yet there will always be others who feel that I stepped in when nobody else was looking out for them. Both perspectives are equally valid, I would gather. All of this began to weave its way into my content creation around the summer of 2025, and I started to re-examine the story that I was trying to tell, particularly with Motorfest. For the first 2 seasons, everything was supposed to be legit and on the books. I was playing the role of a reality TV host, and it was meant to be compliant with the regulations of the game's universe. Most people don't care about that kind of thing. I do. And what changed was an examination into how did I get that role in the first place? If Rivals was part of the canon, and Heat was part of the canon, and Grid 2 was part of the canon, then which parts of those experiences held the most weight? The pro racer was a bust, the undercover cop was a bust, and only the street racer remained. So, I knew what I had to do. First on the list was Donk versus Lowrider, which, while technically sanctioned by the Motorfest, allowed for the use of unconventional tactics, cheating, etc. V2 became the foil for that event, with me referencing a lot of prior events that had yet to be explained in full detail. Losing the final match and leaving Hawaii for a bit allowed me to build upon the lore with the prequel Into the Storm. My interpretation of that storyline became the experience of a death race across the mainland. 64 drivers across 8 events, 56 of whom ended up arrested when they lose, and the final 8 advancing to a 9th, much more dangerous event. There can only be one winner, and the other 7 drivers are made simply to disappear. You can guess how. I decided I wanted Arkwright to be the organization in question, and this had to be done very carefully. When I filmed both NFS Payback and The Crew 1, all of my narration was made to be secondhand. Canonically, I would have heard about both events through the grapevine, but would not have been a part of them, meaning my first true experience with Arkwright would have been the death races. This was also a great way to shoehorn V2's presence into the lore. If Arkwright created V2 in universe, then my working with V2 would have more deeply substantiated my ties to Arkwright's inner workings, which was literally all it took to set up the entire plot of the Rematch arc. You may be wondering, why do any of this? Wouldn't being tied to Arkwright mean that V2 and myself are actually in deep with a criminal organization guilty of, among other things, fraud, smuggling, embezzlement, human trafficking, and mass murder? To be honest, yeah. It creates this characterization that the version of me in the Motorfest universe is a lot more cutthroat and a lot less ethical. That version of me would kill if required. That version of me would harm some people if it means protecting others. Yet, what really sells it, in my personal opinion, is how that version of me still leans on the side of good by wanting to save everyone and to give everyone the freedom to choose their own destiny. But no matter how good my intentions, that version of me would still be considered a true criminal with outstanding warrants in Hawaii, California, Nevada, Florida, and any of the other states where the death races were originally held. When I finished the story, I realized something very important. I only care about the rules because I have a family member who spent a full 30 years working for law enforcement. It was instilled in me throughout my life that you obey the rules set by society, even if you do not agree with them. After all, the greatest fundamental right you are supposed to have in this country is to change any laws you do not agree with. If you convince others those laws are wrong, that is supposed to exonerate you. What I think most people fail to account for is this idea that you could just as easily convince society that certain things which do no harm can be deemed wrong anyway, and utilize that as a tool for systemic oppression. Whenever I pull the no ex post facto defense, it is for this very reason. meaning it is very possible that had I never grown up alongside someone who worked in law enforcement, my interpretation of the law might have been a lot more open-ended over the course of my own life. And it's a little bit hilarious because I bitch about piracy and IP theft constantly on my channel. What people don't realize is where that comes from. Intellectual property is always done under license. It is done under contract law. When you buy a game or commission art, you agree to a terms of use contract. And when you violate that contract, that is a violation of the law. But if the license changes and suddenly grants you permission to modify the game or redistribute the game, then there is no problem. Suddenly, NFS Rivals Plus is completely okay. Suddenly, The Crew Unlimited is completely okay. If there is one takeaway from my experiences in both real life and the Motorfest universe, it is that when you deconstruct the rule of law, you have to own the consequences of that. The fictional me never regrets any decision nor action which blurs or distorts the rule of law. Real life me has to figure that out as well. Will there be times where it is okay to harm some people if it means the protection of more marginalized people? Will there be times where the correct course of actions is aiding and abetting? When you cannot rely on what is written, is your gut instinct enough to be justified? I suppose I just wanted to get that off my chest. If you listened, I appreciate it. I know that I haven't really been around much this year. There are things I need to bring to light, but that will likely be in a different video. I would appreciate it if you would watch Motorfest Rematch if you haven't seen it. And all the same, thank you for watching this video.